Thank you, James. Welcome, everybody. My name's Richard Skewis. I'm one of the partners at Sowerby Accountants and Business Advisors. I've been a partner here for 20 years, which you can probably tell. And the majority of my client base is owner-managed businesses. As a firm, we specialise on the owner-managed sector and try and help our clients achieve their business goals and aspirations, whether that be growing the business or grooming a business for sale or retirement stroke succession. Joining me today is Elizabeth Blanchard, one of our other partners, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. As Richard said, my name's Elizabeth. I have been with Sowerby coming up to about 6 years now. I did my training with a national firm out in Leeds, very audit based, and I've carried on that audit whilst at Sowerby, but as with all the staff here at Sowerby, I am a general practitioner and I assist clients with all areas of their business.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now, just sort of running through the objectives today, there's nothing, we're not going to reinvent the wheel today. It is pure and simply talking about some business principles that you are going to need. We feel that the most difficult time is approaching us now. I appreciate that isn't to underestimate the difficulty that a lot of businesses have been under over the first 3 or 4 months of lockdown. But as we start to reignite the flames of business and people start to restart those businesses, we feel that this is going to be the difficult time. For those of you who have who remember starting their business, young businesses tend to be hungry businesses, so it will be a difficult time cash flow wise, or could potentially be a difficult cash flow wise. The other thing, as I say, it isn't about reinventing the wheel. We as professionals have to attend courses on a regular basis. 9 times out of 10, 95% of what we hear on those courses is just reaffirming what we already know. But there'll be hopefully 1 or 2 pieces that you can take away and adapt for your business, and hopefully I'll help you in growing your business or restarting it successfully. I think that's Elizabeth. Yeah, that's over to you.
Thank you. As Richard said, we didn't want to come into this when we asked to partner with Humber Growth and put too much focus back on the funding that's been available over the last few months. As I'm sure you're all aware, we've had a lot of things going on. You've got the C-bills, the bounce back loans, the furlough schemes, and a lot of that has covered where businesses have been. It's definitely been an uncertain and a trying time, but what we wanted to do today was look past the last few months. We've had, for want of a better word, a mini budget. We've seen that, we've heard what he has to say, and it has been made very clear going forward that this funding, this support isn't going to last forever. What we've seen in many cases is we've been firefighting. We've been making sure we have survived lockdown. What we want to do today is focus on the difference between that firefight and looking at some strategic planning for the future. Because originally, I think there was a push, a desire to get back to those old normal circumstances. And it's beginning to look like that isn't going to be enough now. And we need to look at how we're going to change and adapt to this new normal that people are talking about. But we don't want to go too over the top with that. So the purpose of today is, as Richard says, to go back to basics, have a look at the small details that we often take for granted, and understand how those little bits can be the key to the business growth that we're all looking for.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. It captures it in its heading to a certain extent. It was an interesting conversation I had with one of my clients who said to me that whilst he understands a lot of businesses are going to struggle, he, for one, sees this as an opportunity. And I'm not trying to underestimate what any businesses have been through. We understand how difficult it has been. But I do agree with him that with the right mindset, the right focus, there will be a lot of opportunity out there for businesses. It's just then a case of deciding, how things move forward. Now, one of the ways, to a certain extent, we at Sowerby have probably run 4 or 5 seminars a year over the last 5 or 6 years. Obviously, with the COVID pandemic, we haven't been able to do seminars, so it's just adapting on the changing circumstances and moving to a webinar. Now, please bear with us. This is our first webinar, so if there are any technical issues, it's a learning curve for both Elizabeth and I. James is obviously there to help us as well. But as I say, that uncertain time, yes, but the opportunity is, yes, we can still get our message out. Yes, we can still deliver not a seminar, but a webinar, and therefore we are still able to talk to potential clients and help them in some way, shape or form. There is the need, obviously, to reflect on what we want to do. Did we want to continue growing through this pandemic? But the decision was no, we saw an opportunity, therefore we've acted on it, and hopefully you guys will take something away from this.
I think before as well, you can look at acting or adapting. It's deciding on the strengths and weaknesses within your business, and that's going to be a little bit of the focus today. We all know what business principles are, but I think sometimes they're discussed at a very high level. Everybody talks about growing a great staff base, having a high quality product, offering a service that's outstanding to customers. Sometimes what we don't do is interrogate how those business principles are put together and understand which ones are the key ones that are going to make a difference for our business and make us stand out from others. And that's one of the things the next few slides are going to do. They're going to recap the fundamentals of business principles that we all think about every day, and I'm sure we all try to tick the boxes. But what we want to do is pull out some of the details that you should be retaining and some of those that you might want to think about reforming. There's going to be conflicts between these things. It's not always going to be that you can retain one and reform another. And there it comes down to judgment. It comes down to a discussion and understanding of your own business. But the starting point always has to be having a look at those fundamental things and understanding what they mean to your business.
So, the sort of the adage of cash is king. We look at this and most people, and I'm not going to concentrate on the obvious, things like debtors, credit control, etc., etc. You guys already know that, and there's little value in me going through that. What I would say is, if you are looking to grow your business or restarting it, what you do need to make clear to your customers is that when payment will be received. So as we go through this and we start talking about growing businesses and adapting, etc., I think whilst I'm not talking about credit control, it's important that any new customers or your existing ones do understand your payment terms. The interesting thing for me is what we can learn from the larger businesses. A lot of my smaller clients said to me, well, I'm not operating in the same marketplace, but I think there are 2 pictures on that screen, one of British Airways and one of Virgin Atlantic. And the reason we've put them up there is quite simple, because of this cash is king. Anyone that's read any business press over the last 12 months, or last 3 months, sorry, will have noticed that both BA and Virgin, obviously in the same sector, obviously suffering the same problems with the travel ban. All of those aircrafts have been grounded, and they are going through a significant, what we call a cash burn on a day-to-day basis. The big difference that you will have seen is Virgin have been screaming. They have no cash reserves or very little, and have been burning through whatever they've had and there had been rumours that they may not survive the lockdown period. Now, it seems that they have managed to secure some funding, it was reported. Now, I haven't seen the finalised details, but the rumours are they've secured 1.2 billion. But in doing that, we not being parties to it, are not exactly sure how they've done it, but you can guess that they have had to sell their crown jewels, mainly probably the landing strips at Heathrow Airport. Now, BA have had similar problems, but BA had sufficient cash reserves. Now, obviously, that's important. We're now looking at restarting the business. As I said, restarting the business, young businesses, and this is what it's going to be like, because you may well be starting from scratch again. You know, you've got no creditors, or very little sort of room to play with manoeuvring with your creditors and bits and pieces. So what we need to look at is how you can preserve cash in the business. There are a lot of clients are saying to me, look, Richard, cash is good at the moment. I've managed to get everyone to pay me. Should I pay my VAT? The government have given me a deferment, but I'd like to pay it. Yes, you will need to pay it. The deadline is next year. I would say to you, withhold that. Do not look at your cash flow today and say, I can afford it today. If opportunities present themselves, you will need that cash. Similarly with your personal income tax liabilities, and again, things like corporation tax. So it's about looking at your cash flow. How can you manage it? Now, one of the sort of areas a lot of people will say to me is, well, on that basis, Richard, I'm not going to pay my suppliers, or I'm going to move them. We'll come on to that with a slide shortly about your suppliers and security of supply. I think it's and this is where conflict will come in. It's a tough decision to do that, because if you want your suppliers to work with you, then obviously you need to ensure you pay them, because if they're on this call, they're going to be looking exactly the same, saying, we need to manage our cash. But I think it is a principle that we need to retain. Cash has always been king. If you have it, you are able to seize those opportunities. Okay, moving on to our next slide. So again, you know, this isn't pulling up many trees for a lot of people. It's like telling grandma to suck eggs. But the adage, looking after the pennies, the pounds look after themselves, works. Even after the pandemic, we still see this as a key principle that all business needs to look after. And we're not just talking about the large expenses. It's about looking at everything. You hopefully, if you have had to furlough, if you've had to furlough your staff and the business has been on shutdown, it hopefully has given you some time to look at a blank piece of paper to say, what expenses have I got and do I really need them? One of the areas we think is important is what we call site tours. Now, those would be actual and virtual site tours. So for a manufacturing business, or for a retailer or someone like that, it's about walking through your physical business, talking to the staff, talking to your managers. Do you need that piece of equipment? Is it actually working for you, or is it just sat there and been replaced over the last 3 or 4 years by a new piece of equipment? You may have some staff who are resistant to change, continue using the old piece of equipment, but actually the new bit is more than able to look after it. So again, looking, do you need it? If you're renting that bit of kit, why? If you don't need it. And, you know, if you own it, again, you might look at that as a sunk cost, but I appreciate the current environment might not be the right time to sell, but if that generates cash, that gets back to the earlier slide on cash is king, and it's just looking at doing that. The virtual one, again, is just, you know, I occasionally get asked by some of my business owners who feel embarrassed to ask me a question about, well, what exactly is that cost, Richard? What's that payment out of the bank account? I don't know, and don't really want to ask my staff because I don't want them thinking I don't know what it is. As your business grows, you won't be able to manage everything, and you won't necessarily know or remember what every single payment out of the bank account relates to. I'll give you an example. We like to pride ourselves that we look after our clients. We don't always look at ourselves. Our office manager recently came to us and asked us what a payment on our bank statement was. He received a renewal notice from these people. It was a large sum of money, and when we looked at it, actually what was happening is we were paying twice for a similar service. So again, that involved in the day-to-day running on looking after our clients that we'd not looked at ourselves. So on that virtual stuff, we then picked out an item where we could cut some cost. Based on that, what you're going to look at, budgeting is important. I'm not going to go through that today. I could spend hours on budgeting. But once you've done it, it's then repurposing those budgets and looking and saying, you know, when I'm talking about cost control, I'm not necessarily saying reduce your spend, it's repurposing it. And in our case, it may well be that that money saved on that subscription will be used elsewhere to enable us to be more cost effective. And I think that to me is more the key. Cost control is probably a bad word. It's cost effectiveness, but it's looking at all areas. Don't cut costs just for the sake of it, though. You know, it needs to be structured. Okay, moving on. Customer service. Again, teaching grandma to suck eggs. You know, the most important people in your business, or one of the most important parts of your business, are your customers. Again, we are seeing areas where people look at what their competitors are doing. I think that's important. But I don't think you should just gauge yourself on what they do. If they drop their service levels in any way, shape, or form, that's an opportunity. Again, we talk about opportunities. It's not necessarily, you know, well, they've dropped theirs, therefore I can drop mine. If you can excel, if you can sort of look at how you differentiate yourself from other people, then, you know, hopefully there'll be opportunities there for more business. Yes, there are going to be clients out there that are cost conscious. Some of those you are not going to want to really deal with. If all people are looking for is the cheapest, and again, we'll come on to it on my next slide in a moment, but it isn't necessarily everything. Yes, we want cost effectiveness. We want that the right price so that we can make profit, but we also want service levels, because if all of a sudden one of our customers comes to us and says, Richard, I need you to move quickly, I've got a potential opportunity, but I've got a week to do it, I need to reschedule my workload to help that client out. Therefore, I need to go to my suppliers, in my case it's my staff, and say to them, right, okay, drop that please, and can you do this? Yes, it's easier for me with staff, but if it's an external third party, if it's a tax consultant I need, I've got a good relationship with most of mine, that they are able to drop what they're doing and provide me with the service I need. So customer service, again, key. And I think going forward, it's going to be more important. Security of supply. Now, we've spoken just earlier on to one of the guys on this conference webinar, and he was saying that he was a consultant within the supply chain. He will know exactly what I mean on security of supply. It isn't just the, you know, where am I getting it from? You know, I'm getting it from a distributor down the road. Where is he getting it from? Is there going to be any issues? If I'm looking to grow my own business, or if I want to restart, I need to make sure I have access to that supply chain, whether it be local, whether it be international, and how is the pandemic going to affect that supply chain? Can I get it from China, Europe, to my doorstep? There are two other big areas I think are important. Again, looking at big business, look at what's happened with Boohoo. Anyone who's read the press over the last couple of days will have seen the implications of them not knowing, not realizing what their supply chain is. Now, big business is usually very good at this because they've been directed to, but they've been dropped off many portals on the basis that they're employing slave labor. That's going to have a big impact. Now, I understand it's affected their share price significantly. I appreciate from most of my owner managed businesses, they're going to look at that and say, well, you know, I don't have a share price. You do if you're grooming for sale, and if this impacts on you, it will stay with you. I think the other one, and again, very helpful this weekend, was Tesco's. Tesco's went out into the marketplace, sent a letter to all of their suppliers, and have asked them for significant discounts. My understanding is, in some cases, up to 50%. Now, yes, we all want cost effectiveness. Yes, we want a supply that is cheap or cost effective. But just bullying our suppliers and saying, you need to supply this to me 50% at 50% less than you were before, doesn't breed a good relationship and will not help with that security of supply. You cannot grow your business if you have nothing to sell. And if you don't pay your suppliers, if you don't treat them as a relationship, you know, you need to work hand in hand with your suppliers. You need to communicate and be honest. I'm not saying don't be tough. I'm not saying don't be hard in your negotiations, but it needs to be fair. Now, there is the final word on that slide, which I'm sure most people are fed up with. I think the press have had a field day last year on Brexit. Now we've had the pandemic and they've been starting with that. I have to mention Brexit pure and simply on the basis that we will be coming at the end of this year to a new relationship with our cousins in Europe. And you need to understand how that impacts your supply. Hopefully there are mechanisms in place, but you just need to be aware of it. So again, it's just, if you want to grow, want to continue and have a long-term future, it's understanding that security of supply. Okay, I think moving on from there. And I'll hand you over to Elizabeth, who's going to, well, actually, I'll bring James in just in case there are any questions on our questions and answers, if anyone has any questions.
Hi, Richard. There's no questions in the Q&A. Have any questions? If you want to unmute and raise your hand and ask away, I'm happy for you to do so. No, I think you've answered all the questions, Richard.
Thank you very much. I'll hand you over to Elizabeth, and she'll take you through the principles we think that probably need some reform and sort of some more detailed explanation.
Thank you. So as Richard said, what I want to talk about to begin with is some things that you could consider reforming. The first one of these being efficiencies. Now, Richard's talked about cost control, but I thought it was important to bring up that cost control and efficiencies don't always go hand in hand. Often they are a balancing act, and I'm sure it's a balancing act that a lot of you are already doing every day. But I just wanted to bring up a few examples to think about some one-off costs that can lead to efficiencies, but also the negatives they could have. For instance, spending a chunk of cash on a piece of new software. Yes, it's not controlling costs at this point, but going forward, will it lead to new efficiencies? And it might be significant efficiencies. Sometimes, though, these efficiencies don't appear where we expect them to. For instance, with a piece of new software, if we go back to that example, you can have significant training costs. You can have a lack of integration with other pieces of software, and you can end up having to run two parallel pieces of software at the same time, often incurring double the cost. So when we're making these decisions about our big costs to look forward for future efficiencies, it's not about saying, oh, well, I will have some extra costs added in. It's making sure you're aware of what we call sunk costs, things that you just have to put up with going forward to get to the place you want to be. Making sure you're aware of them and you're happy with them before you proceed. There's also the risk that some short-term efficiencies may not yield long-term positive results. I've been seeing this a lot recently with some of my clients. A lot of them have restarted, opened their doors, and are slowly bringing their staff back as work levels increase. I keep hearing that we've got 75% of the staff back, but they seem to be managing to do the job that 100% of the staff were doing before. Sounds like maybe we found a great efficiency. What I would say there is that's unlikely to be able to continue without risk of staff burnout or a significant worsening in staff morale. Recently, and during lockdown periods, due to COVID, people have realised that they've had to do things that they wouldn't normally do. And they've accepted that very well in many places. I don't think that's going to continue. And there are going to be certain things that we've got away with, certain efficiencies that we might feel like we've gained, that actually, as we move back towards some kind of normality, may not continue unless we assess certain things about them. That being said, as Richard briefly mentioned, it's possible you learnt a lot during lockdown process. For instance, you may have found some staff that performed very well. You may have found some information about systems and processes that you need to consider in more detail. These things might have been hidden in the background before because we're all very busy with our day jobs. Got to be careful here because you don't want to base too many big decisions on a pandemic situation that will hopefully never happen again. That doesn't mean you should ignore the information you gleaned during this period and think, okay, well, it was a great piece of information, but I've got too much to focus on right now. Many businesses have been forced to close their doors. I think Richard mentioned earlier, it's like having a blank sheet of paper. And it is as you reopen. This is an opportunity that many businesses will not have had and will never have again, to think about how you can restart and to ignore that cliche of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Maybe you've had a staff member that's shown significant resilience, quick thinking throughout lockdown period, who you can see now would be suited to a role that you would have never given that staff member before. Don't ignore things like that. Or maybe you found a department whose low output again was hidden by the fact that the other departments were doing very well, but now it's moving by itself and you're suddenly seeing some key figures in the financials that you hadn't seen before. This is the time to consider those elements and push back that desire to return to the old normal as soon as possible. Now, the next slide, route to market. When we're talking about efficiencies, we're talking about predominantly internal looking things. We're looking at our business, what we can do to change how we do things to create the same end result. When we consider route to market, again, we're not thinking about changing our supply. That's the next slide, but we're thinking about how to create that supply, that end product in a different way, how to get it to our customers in a new way. Richard covered this at the beginning. This is our first webinar that we've done virtually. It's not the first time we've used things like Zoom to talk to our clients. At the beginning of lockdown, we started using it and it was very much a stopgap. We needed to talk to our clients. We couldn't go to their premises, so we needed to use this virtual meeting situation. As lockdowns progressed, as we've begun to come back to the office, it isn't actually something we're going to lose. We've decided that for many customers, we will keep using this. We've developed a new way to show our service, to offer our service, and it's worked very well. Doesn't mean it's going to work for all customers. Some still desire the face-to-face, and we will have to make sure we still deliver that. That being said, even once you take away the fear of what's going on at the moment, the infection rates, the social distancing, the second peak, mindsets of some people have begun to change, and I think that will maintain. Therefore, this is the time you want to consider going forwards if your customers will still want to come to you in the same way. For instance, very simple things. Do you need to upgrade your website? Do you need to create a website? Because are people going to continue with virtual requests? Do you need a stronger telephone service? Do you need more staff in that area? Are you relying on a footfall that even when lockdown is fully eased may not come back in the same place? This is something to think about now, not just to wait and see what happens. People as a whole don't like change. It's not something we're very good at. But in the last few months, we've all had to get used to it. Therefore, you do have an opportunity, and I know we keep mentioning this word, but it's quite important. You've got an opportunity at the moment to push through some changes and have them accepted by your customers. These don't have to be COVID-based changes, but now is the time to put those changes forward, which may be changing your route to market to secure your future growth and implementing things where people are less likely to get spooked and go to somebody else because you've changed the way you operate. The biggest change you can do is diversification. Route to market, same thing, getting there differently. Diversification is a different supply or product than what you normally offer. It's a huge thing and not one to consider lightly. We were seeing it pre-lockdown, especially in the agriculture sector. A lot of traditional farms have branched out, offering a farm shop, holiday cottages, even practical workshops, and they were doing very well with it. And during lockdown, some of the key successes were for businesses that immediately recognized how their current skills could be utilized to produce something where demand was growing. A couple of examples you've got there are Manchester Gin. They proudly show on their website now that instead of distilling gin, they are currently using their distillery to produce hand sanitizer. The website states it's available at cost to NHS, and also a general commercial supply is available. And I'm sure we've all seen the other smaller businesses using their facilities to produce PPE. To be careful here, diversification isn't without its risks. Some of the larger firms, I'm sure you'll have seen in the press, been accused of profiteering and making money out of the pandemic. And also, of course, as the pandemic hopefully fades, it's not just pandemic type diversification we want to talk about. When you think about diversification, there's a difference between offering something new that's in demand at a strong market price than hiking your prices unethically because people require what you can offer. And that leads me nicely a bit further forward. Final slide from me here is something that I think is quite important. When I say corporate social responsibility, what I really want to talk about is the fact that people as a whole have never been more aware. There's never been as much focus as there is now on press, on publicity, on consideration of what companies are doing. Richard covered Boohoo earlier. Maybe previously that would have hit the press for a while and then it would have died down. At the moment, the bar is set very high for companies. Not only must they consider the ethical nature of the supply chain, you're often expected to do more. You have a social responsibility as a business, no matter what the size, to the environment and the community around them. And that's what people are beginning to expect. This may sound like something that is not at all important in the time when businesses are struggling to survive, but it does bring with it a lot of positives. For years, small businesses have been pushing customers to support them, to shop local, to consider the high street rather than the big, cheaper chains. I think lockdown in many cases has seen a push in that direction from the general public. Loyalty for small businesses is beginning to grow, and people are supporting businesses that are in turn pushing to support their community. It's not to say the larger companies aren't still involved. We had Domino's over lockdown delivering around 100,000 free pizzas to the front line. Closer to home, we also had Jackson's donating more than 3,000 loaves of bread to NHS staff and teaming up with Cranswick to provide free sandwiches to staff on the front line. I'm also well aware of a business very local to me who during lockdown advertised and asked for donations and coordinated to produce hot meals at cost for local elderly people who couldn't get out of their homes. Currently, they are experiencing a huge surge in business because old customers have become loyal, new customers have appeared, and they are now paying for a local service that they possibly wouldn't have done before, and they're determined to support this small business through that restart that happens after lockdown. I think to end, it's just important when we look at all these things that we want to retain and to reform, to think somehow outside the box. These are all basic principles in some way, but sometimes they get forgotten about, and we think of them how we normally think of them without considering what we can do with them. Customers, for one, are beginning to understand that they can help small businesses, and I think we're beginning to see how all these things we've talked about can really create future growth.
I think the last slide from our point of view is quite important. Whenever you are looking at your business, tax is obviously important. We find there are a couple of areas that people sort of don't concentrate on. And if you look at the three images that we've put on there, you would probably assume that the one on top, which looks like a laboratory, would be the one that gets the R&D tax credits, the research and development tax credits. I can tell you now that the two underneath, the tomato grower and the egg producer, both clients of mine have used a specialist research and development company and have had significant tax savings on the basis of claiming research and development tax credits. Now, a lot of small businesses look and say, well, I don't really, develop anything new, Richard. Well, actually, in both those cases, if you take the egg producer, he was mixing his own feed and sort of using different mixtures to try and ensure that the eggs produced could produce more eggs. Now, there was an element of uncertainty in there. The research and development consultants agreed it was research and development, and therefore there were some significant claims. And the beauty with it, research and development tends to be that you've already spent the money. This isn't about going out and spending money when I'm saying, you need to look and preserve cash. This is about things you've already done. We can go back 3 years. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail as to what research and development is. That is, there is a conversation that either your professional advisor can have or we can have with you to talk to you about what constitutes that. The other area, especially where you have premises, what we call integral features. Most people say, I've bought a building, I can't claim capital allowances on that, but there are lots of expenses within that building that you can claim capital allowances on. If you look at a big manufacturer, there is likely to be an electricity feed to all the machinery. If that was already there when the premises were bought, we can apportion some of the cost of buying the property to the electricity supply, and you can claim capital allowances on it. Now, you have to agree that with the previous owner, and there are some complications, but it's worthwhile looking at. One that's not on here, but I do think people need to consider as well, is patent box. Now, what that means is if you have done something that's quite unusual and that you can create a patent for, then again, most people are put off by the cost of this. What I would say to people on that is, don't worry too much about the cost of insurance, because the bulk of the cost of that is the insurance to protect your patent. Once your product's in the marketplace, people are likely to copy it. Patent box, if you get a patent, means that you reduce your corporation tax rate on selling that product. Therefore, if you do it just for the tax, not for a protection, the likelihood is the costs are significantly reduced, and it's something we look at. And then finally, just really to make everyone aware that annual investment allowances for those who have large businesses or growing businesses, you're allowed to spend £1 million and you get first year allowances on them. That changes at 31st of December, 1st of January next year. So please just be aware of when you are spending the money. all of this, I constantly hear from new clients that running a business can be a lonely place. This is why we're here as business advisors, and working and talking to your professional advisors and creating that team. You don't necessarily have staff members that you can talk to because there might be information that you don't want to pass on to them, but working as a team with your professional advisors, I think, is the most important thing. Hopefully there are a couple of bits and pieces that you can take from today. If there's any further sort of questions for Elizabeth and I, please feel free to ask those now.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Elizabeth.